Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how to do the purl stitch. The knit stitch along with the purl stitch are the two basic stitches of all knitting, and if you've already seen the knit stitch video or if you know how to do the knit stitch, then the purl stitch is similar but kind of the exact opposite. So if you recall, for the knit stitch we would insert the yarn like this through the front loop from front to back, and then loop this around, right? For the purl stitch, you're doing the exact opposite. You want to make sure that the yarn stays forwards like this, and then you insert your right hand needle through the first loop, but from back to front. Then you take your working yarn and loop it around that inserted needle, and then using your thumb, your left thumb, guide it so that you're pulling that stitch out onto that right needle, and then drop the stitch from the left needle. So now you've moved that stitch from the left needle to the right needle. Let's do that again. Can make sure the yarn stays forwards, which it naturally will. If you do the stitch like I just showed you, the yarn will remain forwards. Insert it, loop it around, get that stitch out, and drop. So really that's the key point to remember when you're purling stitches, is that the yarn stays forwards. What happens if the yarn accidentally goes backwards like this? If it does, then what will end up happening is you'll end up making extra stitches, because you'll go to purl, so you'll do the same thing. You'll insert your needle, and if you don't pay attention, you're not noticing, you'll wrap the yarn around like that and you'll make a stitch without realizing that you've actually made two stitches. You've made that extra stitch. And this is a legitimate technique in knitting. When you need to increase stitches, you'll have patterns that'll say yarn forwards or yarn backwards or yarn over, and you end up making an extra stitch which you want to make at that time. However, if you're just doing purl stitches, then you don't want those extra stitches, because you'll start out with 12 and then you might end up with 13 or 14 or any number of extra stitches if the yarn stayed back. So if you were to knit or make the purl stitch as I'm showing you, then the yarn naturally just stays forward. So you don't need to worry about constantly bringing the yarn backwards or forwards. It just naturally stays forward. And if you were to flip, if you purl to the end of the row and then you flip and you purl back again, then you actually end up with a stitch that looks very similar to the garter stitch, because it's essentially going to do the same thing. On the one side you're going to have the bumps, on the other side you're going to have little V's, and then when you purl again from this side, making sure the yarn is in the front. When you purl again from this side, the bumps are going to appear on the front side and the V's are going to appear on the back side. So you'll end up with a fabric that looks very similar to the knit stitch, the all knit stitch, which gives you the garter stitch. There is another stitch called the stockinette stitch, which is really common. And in that stitch, what we do is we do one row of knit, and then you flip, and when you're done with that row, the next row you purl. So in stockinette stitch, you're doing knit one row, purl the next row, knit one row, purl the next row. And in doing stockinette stitch, you end up with a fabric that looks something like this. Now here is a sweater that I knit a while back, and you'll notice here that this part of the sweater is stockinette stitch, because I've got one row knit and one row purl, and it'll end up giving you a fabric that looks like that. Now note that this is not a reversible fabric, because the look of the fabric is different. You've got the V's on this side and you've got the arches or the bumps on the other side. Okay, but this type of pattern is very common. You see it all the time in projects. Lots of projects will have stockinette stitches. It's a very basic stitch where you have purl on one row and knit on the other row. And you can see in this sock that I'd knit up using the part of the sock has a stockinette stitch, and you can see how it's knit on one row and purl on the other row, and you get this kind of a sort of a non-reversible pattern because it is different on either side. And so that's the basic purl stitch. I do hope you give it a try and start knitting a new project using both the knit and the purl stitches. If you like this video and would like to see more video tutorials, please subscribe to my channel, Knittycat's Knits. And if you have any ideas, suggestions, or if you want to see a specific type of technique or would like a video tutorial for that, please leave a comment. Thank you for watching and happy knitting.